Hello, Ender's Sword here again, this time with a fairly Bronze League game featuring our Terran player, Carl, here up in the top right-hand corner of the map, and his opponent for today is going to be Mimi, the other Terran down here on the bottom left corner of the map, and we are, of course, on Zelnaga Caverns. Now, Carl had posted this game up on the Reddit/r/StarCraft forums looking for some advice on what to do in his games. He's a self-proclaimed forever bronze type player, and he was looking at some easy things to do to get a little better at the game and potentially move up in rank as he goes along. So we're going to take a look at some fairly basic things that everyone can do to actually improve their game. So the first thing that we're going to look at is, one, production facilities are for facilitating production. So we're going to look at the use of barracks, the use of factories, and especially the use of one lonely little decorative starport that gets made throughout the game, and see whether or not Carl is really using these to their fullest potential. The next thing that we're going to look at is the idea of supply blocking yourself fairly constantly. You can see for a second there, Carl did supply block himself already, so slightly better timing on the opening is usually good. And throughout the game, there will definitely be instances of supply blocking, and even cases where he calls down supply from his command center using energy on that as opposed to scans and mules and that sort of thing. The third thing that we're going to take a look at is the idea of never being content with what you have. You never want to stop expanding onto the map, and we definitely never want to stop making workers. That's particularly true in any event that you've actually lost a lot of workers, that you want to obviously be replacing those workers. And this early on in the game, we can already see that SCV production was slowing down. He had enough to go right to the orbital command, but was hesitating a little. Probably could have snuck another SCV or something in there before going to the orbital, or just gone to the orbital quicker. One way or the other. You want your opening build orders to be a little tighter. You don't want to have several seconds where you're kind of floating around with nothing to do, and you definitely don't want this much money floating this early in the game. You want to be, say, either making another marine here, you want to be throwing down another barracks, you want to put down your other gas, go to a factory. Obviously doesn't have the gas for that, but something. You want to be keeping these very, very low for the first few minutes of the game, and you should just have that down pat as my opening is going to be this. I'm going to get to 3 barracks, which is what he's going to do. There's no reason that he couldn't have made these about a minute ago. He did have the money to do it, so didn't actually have to wait till now to put these down. Could have got them out a lot quicker. If your opponent's rushing, then it's obviously going to stop them. Just going to help you tech a little better, going to help you get some things out a little faster, and of course use your money. Good idea to be taking these watchtowers. You do want to kind of keep an eye on what your opponent is doing. Carl hasn't gotten a ton of scouting information at all. He of course knows that Mimi is in here somewhere, but hasn't decided to go take a look at anything yet. And we're 5 minutes and 20 seconds into the game. So he doesn't really know whether this is an all-in. He doesn't know whether he's teching to a lot of things. He has absolutely no idea. For all he knows, there could be a command center down here already. So you want to be definitely scouting a lot sooner than this. It's fine to eventually hold this position, but without even taking a look at what your opponent is doing, certainly doesn't make a lot of sense to be doing. His opponent here will note his supply blocks as well. Carl is really ramping up to get a lot of units out quickly, adding 2 reactors onto his barracks. So he's going for a straight bio, no mech type army yet, no real teching up, going for just the stim and concussion. This is indicative of someone that wants to do a lot of quick pressure and get units out quickly, but in the process of doing this actually ends up getting supply blocked himself very quickly. So all the extra speed that these reactors could provide for production is now completely blocked by the fact that he didn't have that supply depot up, and then we end up also using one of the call downs on the supply depot to actually make room. So whenever you know that you're going to experience an increase in production like this, you're going from a point where you're producing out of just one barracks to now producing out of 3 of them and 2 of them having a reactor on them. You know that you're going to be getting 5 or 6 supply out of these every 20, 30 seconds. You have to be a lot more proactive with getting the supply depots down so that you don't have to use that sort of little supply depot add-on, that you don't get stuck there for as long as he did. And if he was really planning to rush here, which certainly would be fairly foolhardy when he hasn't even taken a look at what's going on at all, then he's really slowed himself down. He could definitely have a lot more units out at this point, at a minimum 5 more units out, and really if he had both not supply blocked himself and got the barracks down on the ground faster when he had the money to do so, he could really be more like 5 or 10 units better off than he is right now. So he is pushing out. Take care of your army a little as you are pushing out. It's okay to say send something ahead to take a look at the watchtower, but don't let it do this automatic split up sort of thing. You could catch yourself a little too off guard. And this attack is probably, casual fans out there will observe, is very likely going to fail horribly. He doesn't have any idea what is up this ramp, didn't scan or anything like that, just kind of skims into an army that's already bigger than his, and he's doing it up a ramp. These back units aren't even firing. These guys have not fired a shot at all during the entire thing, so they're going to just kind of get chased down. He did use his stim going up, and of course the red player just had a better concave. He was blocking himself on the ramp the whole time. The chances of that working are extremely low, and he didn't even bother to actually take a look up and see what was going on. That second run back in also didn't really make a lot of sense there. He already knew he was massively outnumbered and that the units that were there had a lot more health on them, so kind of poking his head back in isn't really the best idea in that case either. In a worst case scenario here, luckily the red player didn't have a tank or 2 out, which would have destroyed that army so quickly that he could just counter push and win the game right now. Luckily that's not the case. The Mimi is coming out to take a little bit of map control, drive this army back home, and pick off a few more units, but it's not going to be enough to end the game at this point. Carl can just go up his own ramp, adopt the same position, and again prevent any sort of push against himself. The command center going on here, it is certainly a decent idea to be expanding after that failure has occurred. However, there was something about that attack that rang as a little bit all-in-ish. There wasn't this already going on behind it. We didn't really tech anywhere behind that push, and now he's going to definitely be on his back foot. If the red player was a little more aggressive, it would make it very hard for him to hold this natural location. He can definitely hold his own ramp at this point, but given that the advantage that Mimi has, it would actually be hard to hold this natural if he was actually trying to contest the fact, which fortunately for Carl he's not actually doing. So again, back to the idea that production facilities are for production. There's no reason to stop producing right now. We've got 1,000 minerals, 500 gas, but these facilities weren't really being used for about 30 seconds there. A little skirmish going on here, not a good idea for Mimi at all. It's okay to take that peek up and see what's going on, but to actually engage this force definitely didn't make a lot of sense. He was going to lose that. I'm sure he was thinking, oh, it's a good distraction for this drop coming in, but you can distract him just as easily without actually throwing the force away. Or he could have timed it a little better so that the force hit the front. If he was hitting right now, as this force was trying to withdraw on the back and take this out, it may have made a little more sense, but anyway, that's not really the player that I'm trying to focus on. Carl was a bit slow in trying to actually come back and stop this, but he did manage to get his SCVs out of the way immediately and back down to the other base. He didn't end up losing the orbital command or really anything of any incredible value here, was able to pick off one of the medevacs, and luckily the one that had units in it was the one that got picked off, and then he's just going to leave a couple Marines there, a few Marines and a Marauder, to guard against that coming back so that he doesn't get another drop on his head. What he doesn't do, however, is decide to return any SCVs to these mineral patches for the rest of the entire game. So that's less of a good idea. He was able to kind of hold this off and push it away, but then doesn't ultimately use it anymore. So we've got this base up and running now, but that base is now just running instead of this base. He's not actually on two bases, he's just still on one base, and we're not making more SCVs at the main location, and also now not making any SCVs here. So doing nothing to actually replace or fully saturate both of these places, and we're now going off one gas. Shouldn't overly matter since he's decided that we're not going to make very much out of the production facilities either. There definitely should be, say, another tank going on here. This starport's going to be around for quite a while before he ever decides to use it. No add-on being added here, no medevacs coming out, despite the fact that we have the pumpkin patch type army going on there. Looks like, you know, an autumn after an attack or something like that. And he's not getting out any medevacs, just anything out of here at all. And of course, as production ramps up, you can see that we're going to approach a supply blocking situation again. But instead of kind of putting down more depots, we're just getting some missile turrets out onto the field. Obviously, he's scared of another drop, but he's not scared of it enough to actually go look or scout or anything like that for any sort of attack or force or anything that could be going on. You want to be a little more proactive around the map and actually spot for things as they're coming in rather than just try and defend on the location itself. You're going to have a lot shorter of a response time, and it's going to make you vulnerable to, say, something like this, where an attack is going to come in from an angle that he doesn't quite expect. So everything's kind of, well, only one tank is actually sieged up here, but his whole force is meant to be defending something direct, and it's going to come in from the side here. Luckily, again, Mimi does handle this attack very poorly, ends up with only half of his army attacking, targets down some of the siege tanks, but doesn't actually target the one that was sieged against him. So he could have dealt with that a little better by not having the force go behind the mineral line. I think he actually could have crushed what Carl had with a bit of a better concave and actually picking off the tanks that were causing the most trouble first. He also could have just simply backed off. He had gone in, taken a poke, killed a few SCVs. He could have just backed away, let his own medevacs, of which he had a few, heal himself up, and then attacked again at an angle that was more favorable to him. Carl's instinct here is not the best. He doesn't really know what's in the area. Probably would assume at this point that there is something at the natural, but there actually isn't because he hasn't scouted it out. He decided to bring a few SCVs with him for no apparent reason or anything like that. I think he just kind of grabbed them when he was bringing the force down. They could get in the way or help a little, but I don't really think that was part of the design. And he didn't really bring any of the tanks with him to help, say, siege up the bottom of a ramp or anything like that. And in the meantime, his home is a little undefended. You can see the SCV count is quite low. He did go for the planetary fortress, which will come into play later on, but again, Starport not being used despite the fact that we have an army that really needs some healing up. There's no reason to have a 19 hit point Marauder when 100 is going to bring all of these things back up to full health and just strengthen your army so much. He has to know something is a little wrong at this point, given that there is no expansion here. Either Mimi has completely gone off one base, in which case he's completely mined out, or else there's something else around on the map. You definitely have to be poking around on the map a little bit more to try and see what's going on. And here, if Mimi had just decided to go straight for the base, he could have caught him in a really bad base trade situation, and Karl has no idea that the second base even exists at this point. So he's able to destroy this army that wasn't properly sieged up or positioned out on the map because he was able to see it as he passed by, and now we're going to have that force kind of make its way in Karl's direction, where again he's just not producing enough stuff. No medevacs or Vikings coming out, no more siege tanks coming out. He hasn't built additional production facilities. We've only got +1 on the weapons. He hasn't decided to upgrade anymore or anything like that. And finally, that huge bank of resources that he has is getting dwindled down because we've only got 16 workers on Karl's side. He's just let them all die to attrition. There was the one drop, there was these attacks coming in from the side here, which again is not the best positioning. He should have learned the first time not really to attack from that angle. It doesn't make sense given the force composition that he has. If he was able to get here and put up a few siege tanks such that it was really hard for Karl's army to move into him, that would make more sense, but given that he is pretty much strictly bio, it definitely didn't make sense to go in a place that you don't have a really good arc or anything like that. He would have been better off just coming in the front door and storming in the front door and taking out the army before trying to get at this planetary fortress. The moment he saw that fortress, he should have just absolutely got out of there. There's no way that you can engage both the fortress and this at the same time. But Mimi doesn't really learn from his mistakes in that way, and we'll see that come into play a little bit later on as well. Back in the main, these forces still just chilling out here, defending against this empty medevac, just in case. And nothing going on here, no gas mining, no minerals mining, anything like that. That's not something we want to do. The factory's still not really producing anything. We did get one Viking now out of the starport and going for a second one, so he's decided instead of actually getting medevacs himself to heal up his own army or anything, he's just going to get some Vikings out to maybe pick off the medevacs that Mimi has here. Not, again, a little late, given that this starport has been on the ground for about 13-14 minutes now, so you do tend to want to be using your facilities a little bit faster than that, and there's definitely no reason why there's not one add-on or another on these. Really just no excuse for putting it there, not using it, given the amount of money he's had basically throughout the entire game. Still no SCVs, still no SCVs. You're just not going to survive very long with 21 SCVs compared to your opponent's 35. Obviously, the other guy should have a ton more too, but he hasn't bothered with that either. He's also not getting gas at his own place, and he's not spending his own money. Drop comes in here. Looks like an absolute death drop to me. Got a couple of Thors in, got a good army going, no upgrades or anything like that. But just positioning-wise, it would be really hard for Karl to come up his own ramp, past his own buildings, and engage this type of force with that many medevacs. He wouldn't be sieged up or in position, anything like that. So he does kind of go for the right idea. I'm probably going to have to base trade in this type of situation. He could have lifted some of his production and tried to bring it to the low ground, siege up at the bottom, and defend it that way. It's not like he was mining from this main base or anything like that. But he's got so much supply depots and stuff tied up here that it was inevitably going to push him into the red, and he'd have to rebuild everything like that. He's only got this one base left, and so he wouldn't have the best chance of doing that. So he does ultimately decide to push up this ramp here. Again, really blocking himself, does actually scoot for it, and is able to just barely kind of overwhelm the army of Mimi here. I'm almost a little surprised that he did. A single siege tank up here could have ended that entire push. Luckily, the Vikings and medevac did actually help give vision. And much more luckily, Mimi decides, and I'm going to rewind this because it's so adorably stupid, But Mimi decides, after having all of this and an absolutely overwhelming force, he's up basically 40 supply over the guy, destroys everything in this main base, knows there's a planetary fortress down there, knows there's a siege tank down there and everything, and just decides, not only am I coming down the ramp, but I'm going to come down the ramp and target fire the planetary fortress instead of this siege tank, and then just move command into the planetary fortress while the entire army kills everything that I have and leave the fortress to die after you've already lost everything that you own basically in the game. Mimi does just leave the game here. I'm not even sure that he had to. I think that Mimi actually could have just lifted these buildings off, taken them to the base that Carl had no idea even existed, and potentially even raised a force big enough to actually hold this off. There's not a whole lot here. It's a reasonable army, but there's not a whole ton, and he would have to, one, know where he was going, and Carl didn't know this entire game where the other base was, so it would take him some time to even find the thing, let alone actually go and attack it. And he probably could have got something actually going, put up a reasonable defense, something like that. This wasn't even an orbital command, so he could have turned this into a planetary fortress. He certainly had the money to do it and everything like that. So I think it was just a premature leave after realizing that he did something incredibly stupid in attacking the planetary fortress in what was essentially a completely one situation and one game for him. If he had just loaded that army back up, gone home, defended these facilities, he would have been fine. But we're not here to talk about how dumb Mimi was. We're trying to point out what Carl could have done a little bit better. And overall, it really was the main concept that the production facilities weren't being used continuously throughout the game. He was keeping a decent number of Marines coming out, but just not using the factories and barely using the starport at all. A starport that was there for like 18-19 minutes in the game produced 3 things out of it and just didn't get any use. And the factory maybe produced 5-6 tanks or something over the course of the game. You've just got to be using things a little better than that, particularly when you're floating that much money. And that, of course, leads to the issue of supply blocking. Constantly was getting into supply block trouble during this game, needed to stay ahead of that a little more, particularly at really crucial times. The early push in the game should have had about 10 more units in it. It was still a bad idea, but even when you do a bad idea, you can make the bad idea as good as it can be. And if that push had happened with more units available, probably still actually would have failed, but would be more successful than it was. If you're going to do something like that, if you're going to do basically an all-in, you can't be leaving stuff behind. You've got to bring it with you and produce whatever you can produce. And the last thing is just don't ever stop expanding and don't stop making workers. When you lose some, replace them. Even if you don't lose them, keep making them. When your bases are starting to become oversaturated, it's definitely a trigger that you need to be expanding again and expanding again. You're eventually going to get mined out, so you always have to be looking at expanding. And just because you go from 1 base to 2 bases doesn't mean you're on 2 base unless you're mining from both bases. A lot of people get their third and say, oh, I'm on 3 bases, but they've waited so long their main is mined out. No, you're still on 2 bases. The whole idea is to get to 3 bases, get to 4 bases while your main is still mining. And that's how you really ramp up your production and everything that you're doing. So overall, those are the things to look at, and they are luckily pretty easy to improve. So hope to see you in higher leagues soon, Carl. And Mimi, I don't think it's going to work for you. Thanks for